An unbelievable and yet in some ways expected end of the game for Kansas against Baylor. An incredible comeback or incredible collapse. We're going to talk about that and more coming up next.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty for a live edition on a Saturday afternoon, early evening on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. If you're joining us live, be sure to hit us up in the comment section, on our live comment section, and let us know your thoughts as Kansas loses against Baylor in truly stunning fashion. We're going to be talking about all of that here today, probably looking ahead a little bit to Big Monday against Iowa State, as well as that game against Iowa State certainly takes on some extra intrigue considering what happened earlier today also. So we'll be getting all into that. Of course, we are brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. Yeah, Kansas loses 81-70 against Baylor. It was truly a tale of two halves in this game for KU. A dominant first half for Kansas. They were up by as many as 21. They end up going into the halftime locker room up 19. Baylor looked dead in the water. They had absolutely zero life, and things completely turned in the second half. Baylor goes on a big run. Kansas fights back a little bit and actually extends their lead a little bit more later in the second half. And then just an absolute knockout blow from Baylor. I believe it was a 17-0 run basically in the last 4 or 5 minutes of the game from Baylor that absolutely KO'd KU. And I tweeted about this, Kevin, on our podcast account at Paid KCSN on Twitter. This loss to me feels much worse even than the Houston loss did, which happened just a week ago. Just an absolutely mind-boggling collapse from KU. The fact that it was on the road and you give it up like this when you had a team literally done, cooked, toast, to let them come all the way back into the game and to just show absolutely zero fight down the stretch and give this one over to Baylor. Incredibly frustrating, right? And now obviously we know how frustrating that game against Houston was. This was worse for me.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially since, Houston, you had to play at a certain level. I don't think people give Houston enough credit for what Houston did there, right? Like we talked about it on the show, like KU blew the game. I'm not saying KU didn't blow the game, but KU had to play extremely well to get up on Houston at that point. Whereas in this one, it didn't really seem like Baylor was interested early on. And it's one of those things where, broadcasters talk about it all the time, how important the final 4 minutes of a half are and the first 4 minutes of the second half. If Kansas had come out and played with its hair on fire to start the second half, where let's just say they played evenly at that point, where you go into the first TV timeout, KU still up 19, that might have been it. That might have been all she wrote. Instead, you come out, it's almost like you weren't awake. You're turning the ball over. And the other thing, Nick, we've talked about before, it doesn't count as a turnover when you take a bad shot, but it should. And one of the things that makes teams good in March is it's not talent as much as it is execution, right? And making sure that, hey, they've scored a couple baskets, we're going to go down and get a good look from the guys that we want taking this shot. And on too many possessions, Kansas either turned the ball over or had guys taking shots that you didn't want taking shots in those moments, or not the shots that you wanted guys taking. And so without valuing possessions like that, I think that's just absolutely killer. And to your point, they did respond really well. Baylor goes up a point. Yeah. You say, oh my gosh, this is awful. Kansas pushes it back up to 10. And then, just absolutely knocked out after that point, and just a really frustrating game for so many reasons.
Yeah, I have two thoughts to add to that. Number one is with this team, Kevin, when the game is easy for them, they make it look easy. When there's not a lot of pressure on him, they make the game look easy. That first half, the two-man game with Hunter and Zeke Mayo was absolutely dicing up Baylor. There was some great passing from KU in that first half that resulted in a lot of easy buckets. They were looking in rhythm and so on and so forth. But yet, when the game gets hard, this team makes it look infinitely more difficult than you feel like it should be. And that's the most frustrating aspect to me is like, man, when things are relatively easy and the game pressure's not on, this team makes it look easy. They have a lot of success. But the moment there is some adversity, they make it look infinitely more difficult than it feels like it should be. I mean, even to do anything as simply as inbounding the ball, right? Like something that is one of the most basic concepts of basketball, and you apply a little bit of game pressure to this team, and they can't even hardly do that. So that is certainly, I guess that's an indictment of everybody, which kind of leads to my second point about this, which is this collapse is on everyone. Every player, every member of the coaching staff, Hunter Dickinson, DeJuan Harris, KJ Adams, Bill Self, like everybody deserves a piece of the pie when it comes to the blame game here. I don't think you can pin this on anybody. It goes to everybody, right? No fight, no real sign of leadership from KU down the stretch in the second half. KJ Adams taking a terrible shot late in the game that really hurt them. Hunter Dickinson just really not showing much emotion, right? Like I've talked about it before. Like he wants to, if you want to be the guy, if you want to be that alpha, like where's your emotion? Where's your fight? DeJuan Harris, I think, sort of in the same situation. And then Bill Self, obviously, I think deserves a significant amount of the blame here because in the second half, it felt like he just really completely lost control in a lot of different aspects. Number one, to me, as the second half started and Baylor started to make a comeback a little bit, Kevin, it felt like Bill Self resorted to his old ways. And what I mean by that is he decided, look, I'm going to play guys that I think are going to fight the most and not necessarily worry about anything else. And so what ended up happening was no Ryland Griffin, and instead a bunch of Diggy Coit and a bunch of KJ Adams, and didn't really rotate much off of those guys at all. Flory hardly played in the second half. I know he had a really tough stretch to start the second half, but never really was able to get back in the game. So, that was the first problem is he resorted back to that. And then KU basically went away from everything that seemingly worked for them in the first half, especially on the offensive end. And I mean, I don't know, from my perspective, it didn't feel like Baylor changed much what they were doing. I mean, they flipped to a zone, I think, a little bit, but they completely wilted and went away from everything that they seemed to have success with. And then on the defensive end, which I know you have some stats on that, on the defensive end, especially when VJ Edgecombe ended up leaving the game and was unable to return, it was basically one man. It was one guy that brought Baylor back into the game. I mean, the Baylor's offense for a good majority of that run in the second half was get into the front court and give the ball to Rob Wright and get out of the way. And then you sprinkle in a couple of big-time threes from Celestine, and all of a sudden that was Baylor's entire offensive strategy. And KU just seemingly had no adjustment, no answer. So, yeah, I think if you want to play the blame game, everybody deserves blame. Certainly it starts with Bill Self, but I think, from a player's perspective, those players need to step up as well. But this one, a lot of it does fall on Bill Self as well, just for, I think, the way he handled rotations, the way he handled, or in my opinion, did not handle adjusting to how things were going in the second half. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, and this is a good comment from here from Noah. Yeah. I think in the second half, Bill Self just resorted to playing the guys that he felt like he could trust. And I think that really ended up hurting KU more as the second half continued.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, nuance is important. And I think that putting KJ in at the end of the game against UCF to cool down Hall was something that KJ could do and was a good use and deployment of KJ Adams' strengths, right? He's good at defending those quote-unquote power wing type guys. In this one, Nick, though, you had Rob Wright getting to the rim over and over and over again.
Yeah. It was just drive, and that was it.
It was a game that, for me, would have merited more Flory because you want somebody that can challenge those shots and make it more difficult. And even if Flory did have struggles, and he did, Nick, I mean, it's I know people don't want to blame Flory for anything, and both of us here love watching Flory Badunga play basketball. He played 15 minutes and he scored 2 points and grabbed 0 rebounds. That's usually going to get a guy not to play against Bill Self. I think Hunter Dickinson has some strengths, but needs to be the alpha, like you said earlier on. He needs to be that guy that, hey, if we haven't scored in a few possessions, I'm putting my guy in the lane, I'm putting my hand up, and I am demanding that basketball and trying to do it there. Defensively, you always feel like Hunter takes a little bit off the court, in terms of he's not going to be a guy that rallies from his guy to block somebody else's shot. Probably that's not in his wheelhouse as much, and that's why pairing him with a defender, whether it's either KJ or Flory, is more important. I thought in this one, Flory's defense and ability to protect the rim would have been more important, especially. I'm usually a DeJuan Harris guy. I think it was apparent defensively in particular that he wasn't 100%. I mean, Rob Wright was getting where he wanted. I didn't think Zeke defended well either today. I really felt like this was a game where even if Flory wasn't scoring, even if he hadn't grabbed rebounds, you needed to look at it and say, look, they just can't keep getting baskets at the rim. We're going to have to put somebody in to deter that. And that somebody, to me, would have been, playing Flory out there more often.
Yeah, I'm also assuming, just a quick note as well, like we didn't see Shaq Moore hardly at all. There was some mention that his foot maybe have been bothering him a little bit in the UCF game. I wonder if we'll get into clarification if that was maybe the case again in this game against Baylor, because if I'm not mistaken, Kevin, I'll double check the stats as we're going here right now. I don't believe he played at all in the second half. It looks like he got in for 2 minutes in the second half, but only ends up playing 10 minutes total in the game and was really not effective for KU at all. So I'm assuming that's part of it, because you would think, again, he's another guy that you would probably turn to from a defensive standpoint to try to shut down a guy like Rob Wright. But if he was clearly not 100%, maybe that was the part of the reason there. But yeah, I mean, once Edgecombe went out of the game, it really felt like, okay, basically 3 of Baylor's best players are not playing now, right? Because they already didn't have Jeremy Roach or I'm blanking on the other guy's name that they didn't have. Langston Love was the other one that was out. And then it was just Wright that just took over the game, right? And that's basically how it went in the second half. I mean, and then Celestine hit a couple big threes as well. But yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to Hunter Dickinson, I think he's probably going to draw a lot of ire, because again, he continues to sort of be the guy that stands up and says, I want the attention, I want to be that guy, and yet seemingly wilts in big moments. But he was fantastic in the first half. Hunter Dickinson was fantastic in the first half, especially in the offensive end. That really helped KU build that big lead. But yeah, it just, I don't know where to go from here at this point, Kevin, because
you said it when we started. You can pick every single player pretty much and say, hey, you didn't do what you needed to do in this one, especially in that second half. I mean, I don't think there was a single person on the team, I could be wrong, who had a positive plus minus in the second half. I think Diggy Coit was the best with like a -2 or something like that, or a -3. And AJ Storr played like 2 minutes, and so didn't have like a hugely negative one. But like generally speaking, you could circle the team and say, hey, this went wrong.
Yeah. By the way, if you had any doubt about the AJ Storr situation and where that was at, I think the case is pretty much closed on that. Like, only ends up playing 6 minutes in the game. Basically, Bill Self threw him out with like 2 minutes left, I think, just as an offensive, as an offensive body, I guess, really. But that ship seems to have come and gone, or I guess for a better term, has seemingly departed from the port, has sailed. I don't know. I mean, that's kind of the read that I have on it. I mean, I don't know if maybe you think there's a chance AJ could still put something together, but it seems like his opportunity to make a sizable impact on this team has come and gone at this point.
Yeah, it's running out for sure, and you hesitate to say never, because guys, we've said it before, have rebounded later in the year than AJ Storr has, but they were for the most part guys with better lines to playing time. Like Malik Newman got benched, I think, in February, but Malik Newman always had a line to that starting spot if he played well, right? Whereas AJ at this point, it's kind of like he's going to have to string several games together in order to grab a bigger piece of that pie, and it's looking more and more like that's not going to happen, and he's kind of running out of time on that front.
Yeah, that to me sort of ties into another issue that I have right now, which is it's February 1st. You've now, in the span of a week, had two of the worst collapses in very different ways, by the way.
Yeah.
In recent memory, and maybe today might have been the worst collapse in the history of Bill Self as a coach at KU. I don't know. I mean, maybe we could get into that discussion, but I think that the bigger issue with that is you think about that, and then you start to look around and wonder who's going to step up and change. Where's that spark coming from? Who is going to be in a position to try to re-energize this team? Because you look around the room and I don't think it's going to be Hunter. I don't think it's going to be DeJuan. I don't think it's going to be KJ Adams. Like, those are just that they're doing that. This, I just don't think it's going to be those guys. And you think, okay, well, could Zeke really step into that role? I don't know. I mean, Rylan Griffin maybe, but like that becomes the bigger issue is, I think if a loss like this happens in December or January, you think, okay, well, that's fine. You have, you'll figure it out. But this late in the season, and I know I say it's late. I mean, they still got over half the conference schedule left basically at this point. But even still, like, I don't know where the change is going to come from for this team now. And you talk about this loss, I mentioned it in previewing this game and in our last show about you look at this upcoming 3-game stretch for KU, this game, then Iowa State on Monday, and then K-State. Like, I thought, okay, absolute worst case, you go 1-2 in that stretch. Well, with the way things unfolded today, both in the game against Baylor and the K-State Iowa State game earlier in the day, like, suddenly 0-3 in this 3-game stretch seems possible, which would be certainly a major issue for this team. But yeah, I don't know. The vibes certainly are not great right now for KU. And again, like, the point that I would underline is when things are easy, this team makes it look easy. But when things are hard, they make it look very hard. And I don't know who on the team is going to be able to change that. Like, the ups and downs are so frequent, and while the ups are great, the downs are seemingly much worse, I guess would be the best way to put it. So let's take a quick break, Kevin, then we'll talk more about this game and start to look ahead to maybe that game on Monday against Iowa State. We'd have to tell you about our friends over at Home Field Apparel. Look, win or lose, you can still look good with Home Field Apparel. If you use the promo code PAY24 at homefieldapparel.com, you get 15% off your first order over there at Home Field Apparel. I've got some great gear from them, some Kansas gear. I've got Western Kentucky, because why not? They've got that little red blob mascot. You can get that on a shirt. It's awesome. I've got a Youngstown State shirt from my boy Dylan Woodkey for KU football. So you can find any 130 other teams and schools you want at homefieldapparel.com. And again, use that promo code PAY24 for 15% off your first order. Unfortunately, more KU basketball talk is coming up next.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your #1 source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer with Kevin Flaherty. Appreciate everybody joining us live today and joining in on the live chat. I know obviously this wasn't what we were hoping for, certainly especially at halftime of this game against Baylor, but thanks so much to everybody that hopped in the live chat, dropped some messages, shared their thoughts. As I think just based off of reading some of the messages here on YouTube, you can definitely tell that the frustration is not just between me and you, Kevin, but is felt certainly by the entire fan base at this point. So appreciate everybody that is joining live here after today's game against Baylor. We're planning to be live again on our YouTube channel, by the way, after the Iowa State game on Big Monday. So you'll want to subscribe to the channel on YouTube at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. You can turn on that little notification bell so you'll know when we go live after the game to talk more about KU like we are today. If you're listening on the audio side, of course, you can always subscribe there as well and get the audio on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts as well. So, Kevin, we kind of spent a lot of time talking about sort of how this thing unraveled for KU against Baylor. What were some of maybe your other takeaways, positive, I guess not very many positives maybe, or negative from this game for KU, considering kind of how things unfolded in the second half?
Look, when KU's right, to your point, like KU can play with anybody. KU beat Duke. KU beat Houston for, 38, 39 minutes. When KU is on, they can play with anybody. And a lot of people say there's no fight or whatever. I actually don't know that it's fight, Nick, as much as I think the focus switches off and on. Like it's, and if you want to say it's toughness, I think it's more mental toughness as opposed to anything else. They don't execute over and over again the way that mentally tough teams do. Somebody mentioned it. Yeah, they lost the second half 60-30.
Unheard of.
Absolutely absurd. I tweeted out the stat. It basically per the live stats, and those can be a little bit wonky because they haven't put everything together perfectly. But KU gave up 1.58 points per possession in the second half. KU scored 0.81 points per possession. If you're not a big points per possession person, the nation's best offense this year is at 1.24 points per possession. KU gave up 1.58. So Baylor was basically the best offense in the country by a significant margin. Kansas's offense, by the way, would have been the second worst in the country. Thank goodness for Mississippi Valley State's awful season. But literally, I mean, you had the nation's second worst offense going against what was the nation's best offense for 20 minutes in this one, and that was the frustrating thing. And like you said, the fact that it was over and over and over again, and not finding a way to take the ball out of Rob Wright's hands or finding a way to make him less effective. Rob Wright had 20 points in the second half. So, yeah, it was – I think that was the frustrating thing here. And the blame can go all over the place. I think it's going to be really tough to get everybody sort of refocused and on the right track heading into Monday. In some ways, you almost wonder if the quick turnaround sometimes can be a good thing. I remember in KU football's case, though, when they lost at K-State and the way that things went wrong at the end in a game that they should have won it and broke the streak, a lot of the players said, gosh, we really wish we could get back out there. They had a bye week, and they came out of the bye week with their hair on fire, right? Like they absolutely beat up on Iowa State, who was a ranked team at that point. And so sometimes it's good to have that break and almost have to sit and seethe on what happens. In other times, you want to get right back out there. I'll be interested to see the way they show up because Iowa State's going to be just pissed off after what happened against K-State, because that was not a typical Iowa State effort in that one either. Lost by 19 points at home to K-State, and all of a sudden K-State's struggling together, 3 wins in a row, something like that?
Yep.
And KU gets both of those teams this week. So,
yeah. And in the first half, when KU was starting to build their lead, in my mind I was thinking, man, as long as VJ Edgecombe doesn't just take over, things should be fine, right? Little did I know that Rob Wright, and I guess credit to Rob Wright for making those plays and showing the type of player that he is as well in the second half, because when VJ Edgecombe then eventually left the game in the second half, I thought, okay, you're down now, your top scorer in the game and VJ Edgecombe, and then basically two of the other, most experienced players, and instead they go to a freshman and Rob Wright, who just absolutely dices up KU for the majority of that second half. There's an interesting comment I think here from Noah that I think I kind of want to highlight for a second about they also don't respect their opponents. I think the way that I viewed it was like, I think we've seen some situations this year where Kansas has had a really good stretch And I think we've seen a little bit of maybe just complacency in the sense of expecting the opponent to sort of roll over, right? I think we've seen that at different times this season where
Yeah.
in certain portions of the game, KU will have a big stretch and just sort of expect the opponent to give up. I actually think we saw that against K-State to start the game. KU starts 14-0, and I think they just didn't think K-State would keep fighting, and they did for the rest of the game and, played better than KU did for basically the final 35 minutes of that game. If you from a standpoint of scoring, I think we saw a little bit of that against Houston too at one point, and then certainly in this game, I think we saw it. Right? I mean, it was clear that KU came out in the second half expecting to meet a Baylor team that had just given up. Right? Like they were clearly expecting the start of the second half to be Baylor just rolling over and giving up and not oh hey, we're Kansas, we're up 20, like you're done, right? Like you're cooked, it's over, and instead. I think that speaks to a little bit of the transfer portal era where every team has experienced players. Every team has players that have been through the ups and downs of college basketball, and every team has players that are going to fight back. And I think we've seen that, right? I mean, there have been older games for KU and KU lore and KU history where yes, KU would roll into a place, beat up on a team in the first half, and that team would have absolutely nothing in the second half, right? Like the game would be over.
Yeah.
But that's just not the case anymore. Like in this era of college basketball, especially in, major Power 4 college basketball, every team has guys that can get going and make plays, right? You have to play 40 minutes of consistent basketball to win, right? You can't just rely on, we're Kansas or, whatever at, XYZ, right? Like you have to play 40 minutes consistently. And to be honest with you, Kevin, I don't know that Kansas has played even a handful of games where they've had 40 minutes of consistently, good basketball, basically, right? There's been a lot of games where they've been really good for stretches, and then not so good for other stretches, and so on and so forth. And certainly today was another example of that where, you get 20 phenomenal minutes to start the game. Then you have, you bottom out for the first 7 minutes of the second half to where you give up a 19-point lead in 7 minutes, which is crazy to think about. But then again, KU, listen, I think for the people that are saying there's no fight, KU did fight back. Like KU absolutely did fight back in this game, right? It was 47-46. Baylor took the lead after you were up 19 at the half, and Kansas was able to fight back and make it a 10-point game again, right? And then that lack of focus or that loss of focus, like you mentioned earlier, hit them again, and they lost it, down the stretch, right? And so that's where I think if you're playing the blame game, that's where you start to look at the players again and say, look, somebody on the floor has got to step up and say, hey, let's lock back in here, guys. Like, let's refocus. And I think you hope that's DeJuan Harris, but he's just not enough of a vocal player to be that guy, right? And like a KJ Adams type, he can do it by example. Like I don't think anybody can knock KJ Adams for not playing hard enough, for not trying hard enough. But you're still lacking some of that. And again, I think with Hunter Dickinson, he's the one that I think I would look at the most and say, hey, look, you're a guy that constantly, sort of, for lack of a better term, begs to be in the spotlight, like wants the spotlight on you. And, it doesn't happen late in games. And then you look at Zeke Mayo. So I don't know. I mean, obviously it's really frustrating and sort of even difficult to kind of find the right words to try to figure out what KU can do from here. But yeah, an incredibly disappointing outcome for KU today.
Well, I mean, you look at last year's team that had its issues, obviously. And I think this year's team is better than last year's team, at least with where they're at the same point. Because last year you had the McCullough injury and things like that. But when McCullough was healthy, he was the guy that you were talking about, right? Like,
yes.
You would be going into a break after, they would allow the other team to score 4 points. And he would be yelling at somebody and, whatever else. And he was that vocal guy. I think last year as a whole, the team didn't have the fight that they have this year. But I think that there's not necessarily that vocal leader, to your point, that, hey, you just gave up an 8-0 run. Somebody's coming into the huddle and they're jawing at somebody for not getting their defensive assignment right, or they're saying whatever, or even being the inverse of that, right? And being the positive guy, like, come on, let's go. You don't see that outward emotion from this team, and it's that in itself isn't necessarily, dooming. I mean, Frank Mason wasn't a super emotional guy, which made him seem like the Terminator, right? Like you could be up 20 or down 20, and Frank Mason, still had his game face on. But Devontae Graham was an emotional guy, and you felt, Devontae Graham's emotion when he was out there. I wonder where this team can derive some of that. And it's not just emotion, like we've talked about. I think more than that, it's a lack of focus. It's, hey, we're stringing together, 4 bad possessions. And it's like there isn't the sense of urgency after the second one to get everybody focused back up. Like, oh, you get a bad shot. Oh, you turn the ball over. Okay, now who's getting on everybody like, okay, let's lock up now. I don't know that they have that guy right now. And I do think it's damaging. I know a lot of people want to blame Self for that, but the reason coaches talk so much about player-led teams is because of the importance of that, right? And I'm not saying Self is blameless. Self, was the guy that put this team together and all of those things. But at the same time, at some point, somebody who's actually on the court, taking shots, making passes, etc., does need to step up and take that leadership mantle. They do need some level of player leadership.
Yeah, interesting coming here from Jacob about Zeke, saying if he isn't scoring, he's a negative. I don't know that I fully agree with that. I mean, you look at the first half where I don't think Zeke scored in the first half. If I'm not mistaken, I don't believe he did, right? 0 points in the first half for him. Yeah, 0 points for Zeke in the first half. And yet he and Hunter Dickinson with that 2-man game with the screen and roll game was fantastic, right? Even though it wasn't Zeke doing it, but it was creating opportunities for Hunter. So, and he had some really great passes, I thought, in the first half as well. But and I also think with Zeke, and this continues to be something I've mentioned about him really over the last couple of weeks, is he really struggles on the road. I don't know what it is. It's some sort of mental. I'm assuming it's some sort of mental thing, but he really turns into a different player on the road versus at home. Yeah, Leon's got it right here. It's just like he loses his confidence on the road as a scorer, right? And that was one of the reasons why I highlighted him in our pregame show, previewing this game, about he's a player to watch, because I think we knew DeJuan Harris wasn't 100%. Then it turns out that Shaq Moore is not totally 100% either. Think about the pressure that puts on Zeke Mayo, right? To do other things besides score. And he's not the best defender in the world, and he absolutely needs to be KU's second option as a scorer. And in this game in particular, I think he did a pretty good job of still being effective and having an impact for the most part early in the game in the first half. But
I thought he struggled defensively overall. And I thought that was a big part of it. And to Kyle's point, there are times when you're a shooter and you need to be able to get into the lane, when your shot isn't falling, and generate points, either in the lane or at the free throw line. And I think Zeke has periods too where he struggles with the ball handling, struggles to separate against athletic guys in particular. And so I do think there was a little bit more, especially in that first half, where he was impacting the game in a positive way. And to that point, when KU built the lead back up to 10, Zeke hit a couple really big shots.
He had 2 threes, yeah.
But yeah, it was a game where I think that Zeke not shooting well, he left too much on the table in other areas to be an effective overall guy when he wasn't making shots today. I don't know that that's always the case, but I do think that today, and particularly in the second half, it was that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think you think about, look, the tournament is not played at Allen Fieldhouse, right? So if Zeke is going to be an effective scorer or not be an effective scorer away from Allen Fieldhouse, that could be a pretty significant problem for KU if he's not able to figure that out and get something going away from Lawrence. So that's certainly something to keep an eye on. Let's try to turn the page here, Kevin, on this game. I'm sure a lot of people want to forget about this game. I certainly do, but turning the page, in case you missed it, if you didn't happen to be paying attention around the Big 12 earlier in the day today, Iowa State at home against K-State, And similarly to KU, Iowa State just had an absolute meltdown against K-State. They gave up. They ended up getting down 19 at home against K-State. They kind of fought back a little bit and ended up losing by 19 to K-State. And FYI, those are KU's two next opponents. One who just lost at home by 20 to probably one of their biggest rivals, and is going to be very pissed off coming to Allen Fieldhouse. And the other one, a team that looked dead in the water 2 weeks ago, that is now playing by far its best basketball of the season, and you're going to go to their place in Manhattan next Saturday. So looking at this Iowa State game, Kevin, coming up, obviously Kansas went into Ames and lost earlier in the year. Now you get them back at home. I think Momcilovic is still out. He didn't play in the game against K-State.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that means he won't play on Monday either for Iowa State. So where do you go if you're KU? How do you turn the page to this game in such a short minute? You mentioned the fact that sometimes having such a quick turnaround could be a positive. Do you think that's the case here for KU with this turnaround with Iowa State coming down Fieldhouse?
No, I actually think this is one you'd want to stew on for a little bit and have a few practices for, Bill Self to run the legs off of guys before getting back out and just sort of going through it. Instead, you don't even really have time to process it, right? Like it's one of those where you throw the videotape in the fire because you can't focus on it for very long. Iowa State, Curtis Jones obviously really hurt KU and is having an All-American level season at Iowa State. He's had 2 bad games in a row in terms of, I think he had 8 points in an overtime game against Arizona that Iowa State lost. In this one, he had 14 points, but he took 15 shots to get them. And so the likelihood of Curtis Jones stacking 3 straight games where he really struggles like that doesn't seem super high. And so somebody said, I think Leon said that he would rather be in Iowa State's position than KU's. I would agree with that. I think that if this was a Wednesday game where, KU had a chance to really sort of sit in how bad this thing was for a little while, I would maybe feel a little bit better about it. As it is, everybody just kind of needs to get over it on the plane flight back. And so you don't want to go through this stretch 0-3. The other thing, Big 12 titles don't matter to a lot of people, Nick, as we found out, and that's probably because KU won so many of them. It looks like, barring an absolute miracle, KU is not going to win the Big 12 title in back-to-back years for the first time in Bill Self's tenure, which is saying something about how consistent he's been, but also how much Kansas has really struggled, because you had – obviously that run where KU, was winning them every year. Then you take a year off in 19, win in 2020. You don't win in 2021. Now you don't win in 24 and 25. It's been, the Big 12 has been a really hard league to win, and I get that. But at the same time, Kansas isn't putting out the same sort of year over year teams that it was a little bit earlier in Bill Self's tenure.
And we've talked about it. Like, the reality is it just doesn't feel like it means as much now when you don't play every team twice. Like, That's part of it too. Like, obviously, I guess maybe you might say that's a little bit of coping from the KU perspective of like, oh, okay, now you say it doesn't matter to win the Big 12 because you don't play every team twice. But, I think that's maybe plays into it a little bit. But certainly I'm sure if you ask Bill Self or anybody at KU, that really matters. And like you said, probably not going to happen this year. Nick, by the way, commented here, not me, other Nick. Great name, though, from Nick, though. Likelihood of 2-0, 1-1, 0-2 in these next 2 games against Iowa State and K-State. Yeah, I kind of mentioned it earlier. Like, when I was looking at this 3-game stretch, with including the Baylor game today, I thought 1-2 was probably the worst case, right? But with the way things unfolded today, with what you mentioned about Iowa State, coming to Allen Fieldhouse pissed off on a short turnaround, how that could be maybe bad for KU. And then going to K-State in Manhattan, where that's their biggest game every year. It's the rowdiest environment they're going to have. And the fact that they're playing by far their best basketball, like, yes, suddenly 0-2 in these next 2 and really 0-3 in this stretch seems possible, if not maybe even likely, right? I mean, I'll be curious to see what the betting lines say about that Iowa State game at Allen Fieldhouse, because you have, a home field advantage at Allen Fieldhouse, or home floor advantage at Allen Fieldhouse. But given the way KU, melted down, but then given the way that Iowa State melted down, like, I'd be curious to see what Vegas thinks of that game on Monday night.
The betting line will just say desperation. Like, there won't even be a number. It'll just say, desperate. And it all of a sudden, it was always going to be a big game, but all of a sudden it becomes that much bigger, from an overall standpoint. And I still think, like we've said, like, when KU has been really good, they've been really good. But if you want to go far in the tournament, as Charles is alluding to here, you don't need to be really good. You need to be consistent. Like, you're not going to have your A game every single game for 6 games. It just doesn't happen. Even that Villanova team in 2018 that made just like an absolute mockery out of the 3-point line had like a 2 for 21 from 3 or something like that game against Texas Tech. They still found a way to win. And that's the thing that worries me about this team heading into the NCAA tournament, is that this is a team that I'm not saying they can't beat a really good team. What I am saying is I don't have any faith in them stacking together consistency to where you would make any sort of run, at least not at this point.
Yeah, and that is the scary part of it, right? Because another first weekend exit for this Kansas program would be quite damning, to be honest. I mean, at this point, right? At some point, you got to start really, really making some bigger picture thoughts if that happens again. I mean, we've touched on it kind of at times throughout the show throughout the season about, hey, look, you may need to reconsider how you're building this team going forward if you're Bill Self, but how much longer does Bill Self realistically have to coach? It's a weird time where coaches, this last couple of years, it certainly felt like a changing of the guard for coaching as well. Like, no more Coach K, no more Tony Bennett, no more Jay Wright. Like, Calipari's barely hanging on. And just ask John Calipari how things are going in Arkansas. Not great, by the way, in case you're wondering. Like, there seems to be a little bit of a changing of the guard, and that seemingly seems to include Bill Self a little bit, because he hasn't been able to quite figure things out with sort of this NIL and portal era to be really successful in the NCAA tournament. And that's what it comes down to, right? I mean, KU hasn't been lower than a 4 seed in Bill Self's history. I don't think that'll happen this year. Like, I think they'll probably still be a 4 seed or better, barring a major meltdown. But
it depends on how the next few games go. I feel like they do have that stretch where they play sort of the bottom of the Big 12, to your point, where they'll be able to rebound and probably build some confidence. But the flip side of that is, Nick, we've seen that Kansas is very capable of playing down to its competition. And so it's possible that the Jayhawks go into those games and you wind up having stretches where you don't play well and you put yourself in danger against a team that you shouldn't be in danger against. Yeah.
Once again, do want to give a big thank you to everybody tuning in live here today after the game between KU and Baylor on our YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed already, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, drop a comment. We've had a number of fantastic commenters tonight. Thanks so much to everybody that has shared their thoughts so far this evening. We very much appreciate your engagement and your interaction with us, and really thank you for taking some time to join us here today, especially after a game like this. I mean, I could totally understand watching that game and turning off the TV and just wanting to not listen or watch anything after the way that thing transpired. So big thank you to everybody that tuned in on our YouTube channel, and of course, if you're listening after the fact, thank you to you as well on our audio platforms also. Okay. Kansas and Iowa State, round 2, Allen Fieldhouse, Monday night. Do you have a score prediction, Kevin? Do you have a sense of where this thing's going to go? I know we're right after this game against Baylor, but we're talking 48 hours from getting ready to tip off that game between Iowa State and Kansas. Do you get a sense that this one? Where are you at with this one?
I think DeJuan's health is going to be important. And I know some people were saying you shouldn't make excuses for DeJuan. I thought defensively in particular, you could really see he didn't have the movement side to side. That's not to say Rob Wright wouldn't have still, been Rob Wright. He's really, really good. but I thought the movement was pretty apparent. And the reason I say that, Nick, is Iowa State turned KU over, over and over. And quite frankly, if Iowa State didn't also have some sloppiness in that game, it might have been even worse. And so that's going to be the thing for me to watch in this one is just, if you're going to beat Iowa State, you're going to have to take care of the basketball better than they did in Ames. If DeJuan Harris is at 80 or 85%, there have been periods, even when DeJuan's been on the court, that KU has struggled with turnovers. And so they really need to polish up that part of it. I don't know what to think on this one, Nick. On one hand, this feels like a have-to-have-it game at Allen Fieldhouse, and Kansas typically does really well in those kinds of games. And on the other, you look at this team specifically and you say, well, is this a team that's going to win that kind of game? I think even though Kansas lost to Houston, Kansas played really well for the lion's share of that game at Allen Fieldhouse in another one of those games. And so it's possible that it is really tough to make a prediction on this one. Like I said, I
hate to put you on the spot.
Nathan says Iowa State will win by 10 plus. I don't think Iowa State's going to win by 10 plus. I really think it's going to be one of those games that has kind of almost that air of desperation to it. I am not confident in this at all, but again, I see this as I think Iowa State probably wins this game. And I think Iowa State is the better team. They're coming in off of multiple losses. I think that it's a game that Iowa State probably wins by 2 or 4. I do think KU is going to play a lot better in that one than what they did in this one. But this is also a tough matchup for Kansas, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's going to be very tough, certainly. Real quick, before we get back into that, I want to mention Mark commenting here. Shaq Moore, I think his foot injury maybe was flaring up again. I think that's why we didn't see him as much in the second half when he was asking what's up with Flory and Shaq Moore not playing more. I think with Shaq Moore, that was probably part of it. It mentioned it hurt him a little bit against UCF. With Flory, I think it just came down to we kind of highlighted earlier in the show. I think as things got away from Kansas, Bill Self kind of resorted to playing the guys that he thought would give him the most fight. And so as a result of that, we saw a lot more of KJ and a lot more of a guy like D.G. Coyle on the floor in the second half, which I think probably did hurt Kansas, right? Like I even tweeted it at one point during the game, like, we'd love to see Flory back on the court. And it just wasn't how it went, I guess, with what Bill Self was thinking at the time. But I think that it did hurt KU a little bit. In terms of Leon's question here about home losses for Bill Self in a season, off the top of my head, I think 4 is the most maybe he's ever had. I don't know that he's ever had more than 4 in a season, and if that maybe even less. I'm not sure, but yeah,
I know the 18 team had 3, and that's not the. I don't know if that's the highest, but that was the team that lost 3 times at home and went to the Final Four. But that was one that jumped to my mind just because they lost a few times at home. People said, oh, they won't win the Big 12 because they're losing at home. And then Devontae put together the game that he did against Texas Tech to kind of get them over the finish line in that Big 12 race. Tough to see KU in the Big 12 race this year with the way everything's going, though.
Yeah, agree with that. In terms of this game against Iowa State, you mentioned earlier, Kevin, when you frame it from the standpoint of it's a gotta have a game at Allen Fieldhouse, you would think, okay, slam dunk, like Kansas will win. They always win those games. But unfortunately, I don't know how true that is now, given the current state of college basketball and certainly the current state of this Kansas team that we're talking about in 2025. So I'm a little hesitant on that front. I think Iowa State's probably going to come in very upset after their loss against K-State. Somebody had commented earlier that they felt like Iowa State was looking ahead to KU. That may have been the case, right? I mean, you think about, K-State coming into your house, who's been obviously significantly underperforming this season. You got KU coming up on the road in a big game. Maybe you looked past K-State and just kind of were, sleptwalk through that game and lose by 19. Yeah, I'd expect them to be fired up coming down on Fieldhouse. So you picked Iowa State. I can't pick TJ Altenberger. I'm sorry. I just can't. I just can't. I don't think I will do that, but I don't have a lot of faith certainly in KU getting the win. And Mr. Monkey comes in with this, says, don't care how upset Iowa State is. KU needs to be more upset. Definitely agree with that. My big concern with that thought is that worries me from the standpoint of if we might see another K-State game situation where KU comes out just on fire for 5-10 minutes and then maybe crashes big time and lets Iowa State back in the game. So I don't know. We'll see. Jacob also asked, what does this KU team do consistently? Honestly, the thing
they're
that
consistently inconsistent.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. The thing they're the most consistent at is being inconsistent. So that's what I've got for you at this point.
Nathan said, I guess half of Bill Self's home losses come with Harris start. Harris actually only has 4 losses at home over the course of his 4 years. So that's not too bad. Or I guess 4.5 years now. But yeah, he's only got 4 losses at home. But I appreciate the sentiment.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we'll see what happens on Monday night against Iowa State. It's certainly going to be a tough game, certainly going to be a game with a lot on the line for both teams now, considering what's happened to Iowa State and obviously where KU's at right now. So hopefully that should make for a fun game at least, or an exciting game. You know, I know KU fans maybe would not want it to be competitive and just want KU to sort of handle business and win big. I think buckle up. It would be my response to that. Expect it to be a competitive game against Iowa State on Monday night. And again, like I mentioned earlier, we are planning to have another live show after the Iowa State game late on Monday night. I know it's a late tip, 8 o'clock, so we'll be live late on Monday night. But look, win or lose, if you can't sleep because you're so excited from KU winning, or if you can't sleep because you're mad from KU losing, you can come hang out with us Monday night after the game. Late on Monday between KU and Iowa State. So be sure to keep an eye out on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN for that notification when we go live after the game on Monday. You can drop a comment, share your thoughts as well. If you're listening after the fact on the audio platform, you can also leave us a 5-star rating and review, subscribe as well to our different platforms there. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell anybody about us to help us continue to grow our channel. And once again, thank you so much to everybody that's tuned in, subscribed already, and been supportive. Special shout out to Leon right here. How about that from Leon? Love you guys. Love the show. Thanks so much from Leon. It's always great to know that people enjoy what we're doing here, because sometimes you forget. It's easy to forget that kind of stuff. So big thank you to everybody that tuned in live today after the show, and hopefully we'll see you again and hear from you again on Monday night after hopefully a KU win against Iowa State. Until then, Kevin, you got any final thoughts before we get out of here?
No, just wanted to echo you. We do really appreciate you guys. We started doing the live shows after football games this year and got great response, both on the negative side when things did not go right, and also, when they went through the stretch where they beat 3 ranked teams in a row, and you guys were there for that. You're there, obviously in some less than ideal circumstances here as well. And
the ups and downs.
Just want to echo Nick's appreciation for you guys coming through. We really do appreciate it.
Yep. So big thank you once again to everybody that tuned in live. And if you're watching or listening after the fact, big thank you to you as well for tuning in. Also, if you haven't subscribed, what are you doing? What are you waiting for? It's that easy. One click of a button, one touch of your touch screen if you're on your phone, and boom, you can be subscribed and check out more of our content as well. So once again, we'll be back on Monday nights talking KU Iowa State. But until then, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See ya.